The night I found my husband in the bathtub with our neighbor was the night everything inside me went silent. California's soft coastal calm became the backdrop for a storm I refused to let explode, not outwardly anyway. While they panicked behind a locked door, I began stitching together a plan stitched with patience, subtlety, and cold precision. Every betrayal uncovered, every truth sharpened, pushed me further toward a quiet, devastating victory neither of them ever saw coming. In the end, I didn't need to raise my voice. My silence dismantled their world piece by calculated piece. I used to believe silence was comforting. The kind that fills a home in the late California evenings. The kind that settles against the windows after the ocean wind decides it's had enough for the day. But silence can be deceptive. Silence can be a warning. Silence can be the last thing you hear before everything in your life splits open. I remember that night with surgical clarity. The house smelled faintly of eucalyptus candles, my candles, the ones I lit when I needed peace. It was past 9:30 p.m., and the only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigerator and the muffled rush of water coming from upstairs, steady, almost hypnotic. My husband, Dean, always took long baths. He said it helped him think. I used to find that endearing, a man who takes baths. Sensitive, soft around the edges, thoughtful. Looking back now, maybe that was the first lie he ever told. That night, however, something about the water felt wrong. Not louder, quieter. Like someone was trying too hard not to make a sound. I remember standing at the bottom of the staircase, hand on the railing, heart beating with an odd rhythm, not fast, not scared, just aware. A sensation like my life's alignment had shifted half a degree. When I took the first step up, everything in me whispered, "You're about to see something you can't unsee." But I kept climbing. The bathroom door was slightly open. Just barely. Just enough for steam to slip out in thin white threads. But that wasn't what made me pause. It was the laughter. Quiet, muted, not Dean's deep laugh, but a softer one. A woman's. A voice I recognized. Our neighbor, Claire. My throat tightened, but my instincts sharpened. I didn't push the door open. Not yet. I listened, the slosh of water shifting. A whispered comment. A playful splash. Then a breathless gasp quickly smothered, the kind made when someone knows they shouldn't be heard. I didn't cry. Didn't even exhale. My body went still, and a kind of cold clarity poured through me. In that moment, I realized something profound. I wasn't shocked. Not really. Suspicion had been threading itself through my days for weeks. Dean's phone turned upside down. Claire's strange new friendliness. Their longer conversations at the mailbox. The sudden matching gym schedules. All the little signs that we tell ourselves don't mean anything. Until they do. And tonight, they meant everything. I pushed the door open with only 2 fingers. Slowly, the steam parted like a curtain, and there they were. Dean in the bathtub. Claire straddling his lap. Both frozen mid-motion, like I had paused time itself. Her hair was damp, sticking to her neck. His hands were on her hips. Their faces drained of color the second they saw me. I expected screaming. I expected excuses. I expected begging, or shock, or at least some attempt at explanation. But no one said a word. Not even me. Silence flooded the room, and that's when I made my first choice. I stepped back, slowly, maintaining eye contact with Dean the entire time. He opened his mouth, but I shut the bathroom door with eerie calm. Not slammed, not shoved, just a quiet, decisive click. Then, with the same hand, I turned the lock. It was the smallest sound in the world. But in that moment, it felt like the hinge point between my old life and the new one. Dean's voice came first, shaky. "Olivia, wait, don't." But I didn't respond. I simply walked away, down the hall, each step steady, deliberate. That was when I felt it. A calmness so sharp it almost stung. The kind that arrives when pain turns into purpose. Behind me, the doorknob rattled, a thud. A panicked whisper from Claire. A louder thud. My name, shouted with urgency. I didn't look back. Downstairs, I sat on the edge of the sofa. Hands folded. Back straight. Breathing steady. I stared at the eucalyptus candle on the coffee table, its flame trembling ever so slightly. That was my whole marriage in a single image. Beautiful, fragile, easily disrupted. I could have screamed, thrown things, begged for explanations I didn't need. But instead, I thought, I thought about the years I'd given him. The trust, the sacrifices, the nights I stayed awake while he worked late. The neighborly smiles from Claire, the constant invitations to her backyard gatherings, the way she said my name with that soft condescending affection. And how foolish I had been. But the more I thought, the more something colder took root. Not despair, not heartbreak, calculation. A slow, forming blueprint. Because the moment I locked that door, I realized something vital. They had already written the ending they thought I'd accept. A messy breakup, a tearful confrontation, a predictable collapse. But that wasn't the ending I intended to give them. No. If they wanted to play with fire in my home, then I'd be the one writing the final script. And I'd write it in silence. As their muffled shouts echoed upstairs, I reached for my phone. Not to call the police. Not to call a friend. But to open something I hadn't touched in months. A folder on my phone labeled, "Just in case." Inside it was the first secret that would change everything. People think betrayal begins the moment you catch someone in the act. But betrayal rarely strikes like lightning, fast, bright, unmistakable. It slithers. It drips. It collects in corners, pools in shadows, gathers behind your ribs long before your mind acknowledges it. And sometimes, you prepare for it without realizing why. That's what that folder on my phone was. A quiet premonition, a digital whisper reminding me that somewhere deep down, I had known something was wrong. I tapped the screen. And the world upstairs, Dean pounding on the door. Claire pleading in frail, choked breaths faded into background noise. Inside the folder were 8 items. Receipts Dean didn't know I saw. Screenshots of messages that didn't feel right at the time. Photos of unfamiliar restaurant charges. A picture of him leaving the gym at a time he claimed he hadn't gone. 2 voice memos I'd recorded months ago, small arguments that didn't add up. And a backup copy of our joint financial statements, downloaded on a night when something in his tone had made me uneasy. Nothing definitive. Nothing that screamed affair. Nothing that could convict him outright. But a careful person, and Olivia keeps breadcrumbs. And tonight, looking at them collectively, they formed a pattern. A pattern I was ready to follow. A loud thud sounded through the ceiling. Dean's voice louder now, boiling with fear rather than anger. "Olivia. Open this door, please, just talk to me." Claire added a muffled, tear-choked plea. The doorknob rattled violently. I didn't move. My thumb hovered over a screenshot, one of Claire's Instagram stories from 2 months ago. A picture of a wine glass. My husband's hand in the background, holding the stem of another glass. A hand I recognized instantly. Dean had a tiny scar near his thumb from a childhood bike accident. But the story's caption? "Some nights feel like stolen moments." At the time, I hadn't been sure what to make of it. Tonight, everything clicked into place like puzzle pieces finally pushed into their rightful slots. I locked my phone and set it down gently. Then I picked up a pen, an ordinary blue ink pen from the coffee table, and wrote one quiet sentence on a sticky note. I know everything. Not for them. For me. A promise. A direction. A reminder that from this moment forward, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. I stood up slowly and walked to the kitchen. The house felt different now. Not empty, but charged. Like the air after a lightning strike. I poured a glass of water. Took one sip. Listened to the chaos upstairs. Then another sound emerged. Not panic. Not pleading. Whispers. Urgent. Fast. Strategy whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew the tone. The frantic attempt to align stories. To come up with a mutual lie that made their betrayal survivable. That was the moment my heartbreak twisted into something colder. Because they weren't afraid of hurting me. They were afraid of consequences. I walked halfway up the stairs. Not all the way. Not enough to confront them. Just enough for my presence to echo. Dean must have heard my steps. Everything went quiet behind the bathroom door. Then, "Olivia. I swear. This isn't what it looks like." The oldest line in the world. Claire's voice followed, thin, trembling. "Please. Don't ruin my marriage over a mistake." Her marriage, right. The mirror in the hallway caught my reflection. I didn't look angry. I looked composed. Too composed. That frightened them more than any screaming ever could. Instead of answering, I turned away and descended the stairs again, letting them hear the quiet finality of each step. Their panic reignited instantly. Back in the living room, I picked up my phone again. This time, not the folder. A new text message. From someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Jason. Dean's business partner. Or, more accurately, the man who once confided that he didn't trust Dean anymore. The text was simple. Olivia. Call me when you can. Something's going on. I stared at the message. Not shocked. Not confused. Just confirmed. It was like the universe was stacking pieces onto my side of the board. Maybe fate wasn't sentimental. Maybe it had simply decided I'd waited long enough. Before replying, I checked the time. 10:04 p.m. Upstairs. Another thud. Another desperate attempt to force the door open. But I didn't rush, didn't answer the text. Didn't acknowledge anything except the rising tide of clarity washing over me. Tonight wasn't about reacting. Tonight was about positioning. And their panic was the least of my priorities. When I sat down again, I opened my phone to something else entirely, a document labeled Last Will and Community Property Notes. Dean had insisted we draft it 6 months ago. A spur-of-the-moment, responsible adult decision, he'd called it. But tonight, I realized why that timing had mattered. There were sections of property rights, asset splits, clauses that protected me in ways he'd likely forgotten I insisted upon. And one clause in particular. If the marriage ended due to infidelity, I retained primary rights to the San Mateo property. Including the house we were in. He'd walked himself into his own trap. Without meaning to, of course. But carelessness is its own kind of betrayal. A loud crack jolted the silence. The bathroom door had splintered. Not fully open but fractured around the lock. Their desperation was escalating. Good. Not because I wanted them to suffer. But because desperation makes people sloppy. And sloppy people reveal things. I remained seated, listening to the muffled argument unfolding behind the half-broken door. Claire's voice. She's too calm, Dean, she's too calm. We need to get our stories straight. Dean's voice. I'll talk to her. Just let me handle this. Don't say anything unless. Unless what? Unless she contradicted him? Unless the truth slipped out? Unless she exposed more than he planned to admit? Their alliance was cracking already. And I hadn't spoken a single word. I stood up. Not to confront them. But to leave. I grabbed my keys, my purse, my sweater draped over the sofa. Not rushed, methodical. When I walked toward the front door, the thudding upstairs stopped abruptly. Then Claire's horrified voice. She's leaving, Dean, she's leaving. Dean screamed. Olivia, wait. But I didn't. I stepped out into the cool California night. Pulling the door shut behind me. The air was crisp. The moon was low. The world felt wider than it had an hour earlier. Bigger, sharper, and strangely full of possibility. I didn't get into my car. Not yet. Instead, I stood on the porch, looked up at the sky, and allowed myself one small, private smile. Because now the stage was set. The characters were in motion. The first consequences were unfolding. And they had no idea what comes next. As I finally walked toward my car, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Jason. This one said, Olivia. It's urgent. You're not safe with Dean. And that was the moment I realized. This betrayal ran deeper than a bathtub. There's a strange stillness that comes after you walk away from the place you once called home. A moment where the world feels too quiet, too observant, as if it knows you've crossed a threshold you can never return from. Standing beside my car that night, the cool California breeze brushing against my face, I felt that stillness. It wasn't peace. It wasn't shock. It was something heavier. A gravity pulling at the truth I had pretended not to see. My phone buzzed again. Jason's name lit the screen. I'm serious. Call me. Tonight. Urgent. Direct. Punctuated like a man who had been waiting for months to say what he knew. And suddenly, all the breadcrumbs I'd collected, the coincidences, the late nights, the it slipped my mind moments aligned into a single sickening line. But I didn't call him. Not yet. I needed space, distance, perspective. So instead of getting into the car, I slid into the driver's seat and let my hands rest on the steering wheel. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes didn't look angry. They looked tired. Tired of doubting myself. Tired of excusing him. Tired of carrying a marriage by sheer willpower. But beneath the exhaustion, there was a glimmer of something sharper. Resolve. I started the car but didn't choose a destination. The roads were empty. lit by the pale glow of streetlights stretching through our neighborhood, a quiet suburban pocket of San Mateo that always looked picture-perfect from the outside. Funny how even the prettiest places can hide rot. The tires hummed softly against the pavement. My mind replayed the bathroom scene like a warped film strip: steam, skin, shock, silence. But it wasn't the image that burned the most. It was the realization that everything I had been sensing for months, every uneasy instinct, every moment of doubt, had been right. I drove aimlessly, letting the road unravel beneath me, until I found myself pulling into a small overlook above the coastline. The waves below were dark, restless, the ocean shifting in its sleep. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat in the quiet darkness. Up here, the world didn't demand decisions, didn't demand reactions. It only offered space. And I needed that to process the next message that came through. My phone lit up again. This time, a longer text. Olivia. Dean's been hiding things. Not just Claire. Please call me so I can explain before he reaches out to you. Not just Claire. Those words scraped through my chest like metal. Up until that moment, I had thought betrayal was singular, a wound inflicted by two people in a bathtub. But now it hinted at something deeper, something older, something layered. I pressed my phone to my lips, thinking, Jason and I were never close. Not in a way that made this message feel personal. He was the pragmatic one in the business, the numbers guy, the one who always felt overshadowed by Dean's charisma. But he wasn't someone who wasted words. If he was warning me, he believed I was in the dark about something significant. I typed a single message back. I can talk. 5 minutes. Before I could hit send, another message appeared. Not from Jason. From Dean. Olivia. Please. Come home. Let's talk. I can explain everything. Explain. The word of guilty men all over the world. My thumb hovered over the screen. His contact photo, one from years ago, before the cracks began, looked like a stranger now. I didn't reply. Not to him. Instead, I sent the message to Jason. Call me. The phone rang almost immediately. I answered with a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Olivia? Jason said, voice low, urgent, strained. I've been waiting for you to reach out. I didn't speak. I let him fill the silence people reveal the most when you give them space to be guilty or brave. He exhaled heavily. I don't know how much you know, but I assume something happened. My gaze drifted to the dark waves below. I found him, I said softly. With Claire. A sharp, bitter inhale on his end. I'm sorry. Really? But that's not the worst part. My stomach tightened. The night air felt colder. Jason continued. There's money missing. From the business. From the shared account. Transfers made over the last 7 months that don't make sense. I tried confronting him privately, but he shut me out. A pause. He's hiding something bigger than an affair. The words sank into me slowly. A heavier betrayal, a quieter one. The kind you don't find in a bathtub but in paperwork, numbers, secrets carefully tucked away. Jason, I murmured. Why tell me now? He hesitated. Because I think he's preparing for a way out. And I think Claire is part of it. A way out. Not just of the marriage. But financially, legally. My pulse thudded in my ears. Jason added, please don't go home yet. Not until you know what you're dealing with. Thank you, I said quietly. He exhaled, relieved I hadn't hung up. Call me if anything happens. Anything. I ended the call. The silence that followed wasn't comforting this time. It was heavy with confirmation. I hadn't just been replaced. I had been used. Sitting in that parked car, I let memories surface. The kind I had ignored because love makes fools of the observant. Dean's sudden generosity with Claire's family. The nights he claimed he was double-checking quarterly budgets. His distant behavior, his softness turning brittle. The moments where his phone would buzz and he'd step outside to take the call. Always just out of earshot. The strange tension between him and Jason at the Christmas party. The withdrawals I couldn't explain. His insistence that we didn't need separate accounts. All the tiny red flags I had tucked into drawers of denial. How blind I had been. Not stupid. Not naive. Just tired of fighting for a marriage alone. An hour passed before I drove back. Not because I wanted to confront him, but because I needed to see how desperate he had become. Desperation reveals character. And tonight, I needed to know exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked unchanged, but the lights were on in every room. Every single one. A sign. He wanted no shadows to hide in. No corners for guilt to linger. He wanted control. I stepped out of the car slowly. The faintest sound reached my ears. Sobbing. Not mine. Claire's. She was sitting on the curb, wrapped in a towel, shivering in the night air. Her clothes probably still inside the locked bathroom. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Olivia," she whispered. "Please, please talk to me." Her voice broke in a way that might have evoked sympathy. If I didn't know what she had been doing an hour earlier. I walked past her without stopping. She reached out like she might grab my arm, but thought better of it. Good. Even in her shame, she could sense something had shifted in me. Something irreversible. Dean met me at the front door. He looked destroyed, red-eyed, tense, hands trembling slightly. "Olivia," he breathed, stepping toward me. I stepped back. His face twitched. He wanted to hug me, to touch me, to perform remorse like an actor begging for one more scene. I didn't speak, didn't give him the relief of a reaction. "Please, just come inside. Let's talk." His voice wasn't pleading. It was controlled, measuring, trying to gauge how much I knew. I stared at him, at the man who had once claimed he'd never hurt me, and felt something inside me fracture quietly. Heartbreak isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a silent tear in the fabric of your life. Sometimes it changes you in ways that can't be undone. I walked past Dean into the house without a word. The moment I crossed the threshold, he said softly, too softly, "Olivia, before you say anything, I need you to understand. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." That sentence told me everything. There was a plan, and I was never meant to survive it intact. The next morning arrived with a kind of brightness that felt insulting, too clean, too gentle, too unaware of the truth that had begun to unravel beneath it. I woke before the alarm, not because I was rested, but because something in my mind wouldn't loosen its grip. A single, persistent image lingered: the locked bathroom door, the muffled splash of water, the crack of nervous laughter from inside. The memory had sharpened overnight. At first I had convinced myself it was nothing, that anyone could accidentally lock a bathroom door. Anyone could laugh nervously. Anyone could be startled. But the more I replayed it, the less innocent it felt. Something had been off, terribly off, and pretending otherwise only made my thoughts spin darker. Dean was already up, making breakfast as if the world hadn't tilted slightly. Eggs, toast, orange slices arranged neatly. He'd always been like that, overly perfect in the small things, so no one would question the big ones. "Sleep okay?" he asked, casual but too aware. "Fine," I lied, sitting at the island. His hand trembled slightly when he slid the plate toward me. A tiny shake. A tiny tell. I noticed everything now. Across the window, I caught sight of our neighbor's house. Quiet, curtains drawn. The same house where, yesterday, she had told me she wasn't feeling well while apparently feeling well enough to. What? Take a bath with my husband? The eggs on my plate turned to rubber in my mouth. Dean watched me, too closely, like he was trying to read whether I suspected anything. And that was the moment my skepticism snapped into something clearer. He wasn't acting like an innocent man defending himself against an unfair assumption. He was acting like a guilty man wondering how much I knew. "About yesterday," I began, watching his face carefully. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You really don't remember locking the door?" I asked. "I told you I must have bumped it or something." He forced a soft laugh. "You know how old that knob is." I didn't laugh. "I was helping her," he added. "She twisted her ankle. I was checking her foot. That's all." In the bathtub, he froze. Not fully. Just enough for the lie to tremble around the edges. Then he recovered. "She slipped trying to get out. You know how clumsy she is." A practiced smile. One that didn't reach his eyes. "She wanted to wash before she came over to talk. I was giving her some privacy. That's why I accidentally." The stutters told me more than the words did. But I nodded anyway. I let him believe I was softening. Because one thing had become very clear: the truth wasn't going to walk to me willingly. I was going to have to go find it myself. The neighbor's porch was warm beneath the sun, and her potted lavender bushes released a scent too gentle for the storm twisting in my chest. She opened the door quickly when she saw me, almost too quickly, like she'd been waiting. "Oh. Hi. Feeling better today?" she asked, her smile slightly too bright, like a bulb on the verge of burning out. I observed her ankle, no bruise, no bandage, no limp, not even the faintest sign of a slip or fall. "Much better," she added, noticing where my eyes landed. It was a minor twist. "Really?" My voice stayed steady. "Dean said it was bad enough that he had to help you in the tub." Her expression flickered. A split second, a blink of panic, then a laugh. "Forced? Paper thin. Well, you know how dramatic he can be," she said. It was nothing, really. But she didn't meet my eyes. And when she shifted her weight, there was no hesitation, no guarding the ankle she claimed had been twisted. She was lying too. When I returned home, Dean pretended not to watch me from the couch, but I felt his gaze. I felt his worry. I felt his fear. Something had happened behind that door. Something both of them were scrambling to cover. And the only thing more dangerous than a lie is two people trying to keep the same one straight. I walked past him without a word. He didn't call after me. And that silence, our silence, was louder than anything either of them could have confessed. Because now I wasn't just suspicious. I was certain. And I wasn't emotional. I wasn't shaky. I wasn't dramatic. I was cold, focused, and ready. The afternoon light slanted across the living room in long, golden bars, beautiful, gentle, peaceful, but the peace didn't match the atmosphere. It felt like standing in a house right before a storm breaks, quiet but with pressure building in the walls. Dean moved around the house with a stiffness he couldn't hide. I saw it in the way he stood too still when he heard me walk by. I saw it in the way he avoided rooms I entered, like each one held the risk of exposing him. He was trying to calculate, trying to anticipate, trying to stay one step ahead of whatever he thought I might know. And that alone told me everything. He was hiding something that mattered enough to fear discovery. I started with the simple things, patterns, behaviors. His phone lay on the counter while he showered, a rarity. Dean never left it out. He always kept it face down, locked, guarded. But today? He'd left it charging out in the open, like a man trying too hard to appear innocent. That alone made it suspicious. I didn't touch it. Not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because touching it would tip him off. A single smudge, a moved charger cord, he'd notice. He always noticed the small things. Instead, I used silence. Silence made people talk. Silence made them anxious. Silence made them sloppy. I turned on the sink faucet unnecessarily, rattled a drawer, opened a cabinet, small noises that told him I wasn't near his phone. Then I stepped quietly into the hallway, listening. He finished his shower quickly. Too quickly. Water shut off. Footsteps. A pause. Then I heard him check the counter. He lifted the phone. Screen unlocked. Scrolls. Fast and frantic. Clearing notifications. Deleting messages. The subtle, frantic panic of a guilty man. I stayed silent. I let him think everything was normal. Later, I stepped out to water the front garden just as she came outside to retrieve a package. Timing, perhaps coincidental yet too perfect to ignore. She froze when she saw me. "Hey," she said with a nervous lift of her hand. "Hey," I replied evenly. Her gaze darted toward our house. Then to me. Then down at her feet. She shifted her weight too many times for someone supposedly relaxed. "You doing okay?" she asked, voice cracking slightly. "I'm fine." She swallowed. Her fingers worried the tape on the package. "Tell Dean I said thanks for helping me yesterday," she said. Ah, there it was. A statement rehearsed. A line meant to align with his. "Of course," I said. "Though it's strange. You don't look hurt." She opened her mouth and nothing came out. Her eyes gave her away before her words could. I didn't press further. I simply nodded, walked back inside, and left her trembling on her porch. Two people who share a lie end up trapped by the same fear. They start seeing threats everywhere. And fear makes people careless. Very careless. Evening came, and Dean tried building a bridge with small gestures, offering to cook dinner, asking casual questions, smiling too much. None of it felt real. It felt like a man applying wallpaper over a cracked wall, hoping no one would notice the bulge. But then, just before bed, he said something that made my breath still. "I'm glad you trust me," he murmured, sliding under the covers. I turned to look at him. "I never said I did." There. A flick in his eyes. A tremor beneath calm. He exhaled too slowly, too deliberately. Yesterday was nothing, he repeated. You've mentioned yesterday so many times, I said softly. More than I have. His pupils tightened. His hand, resting near mine, curled slightly. People don't cling to nothing. Not unless they're terrified it's something. That night, I lay awake long after his breathing deepened into sleep. I wasn't ready to confront him yet. Confrontation forces truth into hiding, makes liars sharpen their stories. No, what I needed was simplicity. I needed him to stay comfortable long enough to reveal himself piece by piece. The real unraveling would happen through small cracks. Tiny inconsistencies. Moments of pressure. And I was going to create those moments. Tomorrow, I would start with the digital traces, the kind liars always forget. Then I would examine the timeline. The neighbor's behavior. His excuses. The door. The odd details. And once I gathered enough threads, I would start tugging. Softly at first. Then harder. Until the entire fabric of their lie came undone. The morning light crept quietly across the bedroom, but it felt colder than usual. Maybe because I was colder now inside, where warmth used to live. Dean slept beside me, his back turned toward the window, his breathing steady, unbothered. It always amazed me how easily guilty people slept, how easily they dreamed, how easily they forgot. I didn't. I lay there watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, thinking about the moment everything shifted for me, not the bathtub scene, not the trembling neighbor, not even his frantic scrolling, no. It was the moment I realized he was comfortable lying to my face, comfortable denying reality, comfortable thinking I wouldn't find out, comfortable assuming I wouldn't act. Love doesn't die in dramatic explosions. It dies quietly, the way a flame slowly suffocates when deprived of oxygen. And that morning, I felt the last ember go out. I got out of bed slowly. I didn't wake him. I didn't want to. I moved through the house with a strange clarity, every step calculated, every breath measured. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. Just a heavy quietness. A numbness that settled over me like a thin layer of frost. While making coffee, I caught my reflection in the microwave door. My face looked unfamiliar, still me, but sharper around the edges. A quieter version. A version that listened more than she spoke. I sipped my coffee, staring out the window as if waiting for something. Maybe an answer. Maybe a sign. Maybe courage. But courage wasn't coming. Not yet. Just the quiet. When Dean finally woke, he played the part he thought I wanted. He wrapped an arm around my waist in the kitchen, kissed my cheek, asked if I slept well. He performed softness. He performed affection. But I felt the staging of it, calculated movements, practiced tones, a man trying to rebuild a mask as quickly as possible. Everything okay? He asked. I nodded, though he studied my face too long, waiting for more. He didn't get it. The silence unnerved him. Silence always unnerves liars. Look, he began lightly. I know this week's been weird. But we're okay, right? Are we? I asked softly. His throat tightened the way it does when he's preparing a lie. He swallowed. Forced a smile. Of course. But underneath his voice, I heard it, the tremor of someone afraid of being exposed. Later, when I stepped outside to toss something in the bin, she was already in her yard. She froze the second she saw me. She didn't try to smile today. She didn't even pretend. She grabbed her gardening gloves and hurried back inside without a word. Good. Guilt grows in silence, fast, uncontrollable, tangled like vines. And now she was trapped in it. Dean left his phone unattended again. Too intentionally this time. It was placed just slightly off angle from the charger port, as if positioned on purpose. Almost like he wanted me to pick it up. Like he was testing me, seeing if I would break. Seeing if I would confront him so he could deny everything all at once and shift the blame onto my paranoia. He wanted to control the narrative. Manipulators always do. But I didn't touch it. That choice alone seemed to unnerve him more than anything else. In the evening he finally broke the silence. You've been distant, he said, forcing a lightness into his voice that didn't reach his eyes. Have I? I answered. You have. You're not saying much. That's because I'm thinking. What about us? He stiffened. Just a millimeter, but I saw it. What about us? He asked carefully. Patterns, I said. He stared at me, really stared, as if trying to decipher whether I'd already found everything or if I was bluffing. I saw the panic flicker behind his calm expression. Is something wrong? He asked too quickly. Nothing you want to admit, I whispered. His breathing hitched, and he looked away first. That told me more than words ever could. That night, I realized something important. The heartbreak wasn't coming all at once, like a tidal wave. It was arriving quietly, seeping into me like cold water through cracks in a wall. I felt it when I watched him brush his teeth. I felt it when he climbed into bed without kissing me goodnight. I felt it when he turned off the light without asking if I was ready for sleep. This was the man I loved. This was the man I trusted. And now he was a stranger trying too hard to seem familiar. I hated that it still hurt. But even pain can become fuel. At around midnight, when I couldn't sleep, I went to the living room and sat on the couch in the dark. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a wall clock. I replayed the bathtub scene in my mind. Not the shock. Not the betrayal. But the detail I had missed until now. The door had been locked from the inside. Which meant she didn't slip and need help. He didn't just happen to be there. They locked the door to hide. To be comfortable. To be uninterrupted. And when I realized that, the heartbreak finally hit. I cried silently in the dim light, no sobs, no noise, just tears slipping down my face like quiet confessions. Not because he cheated. Not because he lied. But because I let myself love someone who could betray me so carelessly. But grief eventually fades into something colder. Something sharper. Resolve. That night, I stopped being hurt Olivia. I became calculating Olivia. The version of myself I hadn't met yet. The version that I didn't react but strategized. That's where the real Olivia wakes up. The one who doesn't cry in the dark. The one who hunts for truth. The one who plans revenge not loudly, but in absolute, devastating silence. By the time I woke the next morning, the heartbreak had already been repurposed. It had transformed quietly, without announcement, into something colder. A determination that refused to bend. An intelligence focused on dismantling everything he and Claire thought they controlled. I moved through the house like a ghost, observing. Every habit, every nuance, every small tell of guilt was now a tool I could use. The spilled coffee cup on the counter, the toothpaste lid slightly askew, the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the guest room he had never used. I catalogued it all. Each small imperfection would serve a greater purpose. This wasn't about revenge in the explosive, dramatic sense. This was about control, precision, patience, quiet domination. I pulled out my phone, opening the just-in-case folder again. The screenshots, the voice memos, the odd restaurant charges. Everything had been waiting for me, but now I saw the connections clearly. The bath incident was only a fragment. A symptom. The true betrayal was deeper. Financial mismanagement, secrets, attempts to manipulate me, subtle gaslighting over months. And buried within one of the memos dated months ago was the first clue that Claire was more than just a fleeting temptation. She wasn't an accidental part of Dean's life. She was strategic. She had been weaving her way in while pretending to be a neighbor, a friend. And that was where my plan began. I started with a simple principle: to win, you must first understand the terrain. I drew diagrams on paper, connecting people, events, and financial threads. Small notes in the margins. Bathroom door incident confirmed deception, Claire potential leverage, weak point, Dean pattern of lying, predictable panic. Jason ally, source of intelligence. Then I created a timeline. Every suspicious call, every unexplained errand, every late-night work claim. Patterns emerged. Predictable ones. Those patterns were dangerous for him. And they were lethal for me. I couldn't rush. Patience was my weapon. I started checking small, public records, property transfers, online posts, social media habits. Claire had left tiny traces that no one else would notice but me. A comment on a post, a picture of her hand on a car she didn't own, a subtle mention of my little escape in a caption months ago. Each trace was a breadcrumb. Each breadcrumb would lead to a controlled reveal. I kept notes in a new folder, Operation Calm, because outwardly, nothing had changed. Dean still saw me as the hurt, confused wife. Claire still saw me as naive. They didn't know I had already begun pulling at the strings. It was time to create the first situation where I could observe both of them reacting under pressure. I sent a text to Jason. A short controlled message. Meet me tonight. I have information you'll want. The timing was deliberate. Jason would show up after work, exactly when Dean and Claire were expecting a calm evening at home. Manipulation begins with observation. Observation begins with timing, and timing begins with control. By evening, the stage was set. Dean and Claire went about their routine smiles, casual conversation, touches that didn't reach the eyes. I entered the living room casually, keeping my voice neutral. I'll be out for a bit. Dean looked startled. Not at me leaving but at the precision of my tone. The calm in my voice was unsettling because it wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was measured. Out? He asked. Where to? Just, some things I need to handle, I said. I'll be back soon. I left, locking the front door behind me, deliberately, not because I needed safety. Because I wanted to test his reaction. Inside, I knew he had already begun calculating. Where I might go, who I might contact, what I might discover. And every calculation he made was wrong. Because I had already decided. I wasn't looking for answers. I was looking for openings. Jason pulled up 10 minutes later. He parked discreetly, and I greeted him at the side gate. He had the look of someone carrying secrets heavier than themselves, someone who knew the storm but didn't know the eye of it yet. I handed him a copy of the folder I had brought with me, my digital breadcrumbs, carefully arranged in chronological order. His eyes widened. Olivia. This isn't the full picture, I said softly. But it's enough to see patterns, enough to predict next moves. He nodded, comprehension dawning. You want revenge? I didn't correct him. Not yet. I only smiled faintly. Because this wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was preparation. A subtle, quiet strategy that would dismantle them piece by piece. Back home. The front door clicked behind me. Dean was waiting, a faint tremor in his jaw. Where were you? He asked. I tilted my head, calm and collected. Out, I said. And I think it's time you started worrying. And with that, the first moves in a game they didn't know they were playing had begun. The house smelled like faint vanilla and fear, the subtle scent of someone trying too hard to maintain normalcy. Dean moved through it like a man defusing a bomb he couldn't see. Claire was no better, lurking in corners, pretending to water plants while glancing at every door and window. I watched them both, silent, calm. My own breathing steady, controlled. Nothing about me betrayed what I was planning. Because chaos is more effective when it comes from nowhere. The first step was small. Almost trivial. But precision mattered. Small mistakes lead to bigger reveals. I started with a single action, rearranging the living room slightly. A picture frame tilted. A book pulled out of place, the faintest trace of someone having touched the couch cushions, just enough for Dean to notice, for Claire to glance, and for both of them to assume I was observing closely. They weren't wrong. I was observing. Always observing. And as expected, the panic began to rise, subtle but unmistakable. The way Dean's eyes flicked toward the front door. The way Claire's hands twisted the edge of the towel she was holding. Pressure works quietly. It doesn't scream. It doesn't shout. It grows inside someone until they slip. The next day I waited until Dean was in the office. Claire was out running errands. I sat in the quiet of the kitchen and opened Dean's laptop left unattended, as if he trusted the house too much. I didn't rush. I didn't dive in. I scanned. Emails, calendar entries, digital receipts. And there it was. A confirmation I had suspected but hadn't been able to prove until now. Claire's name attached to a wire transfer, direct. Sizable, untraceable without careful scrutiny. A payment Dean had claimed was business-related. I leaned back, letting the quiet sink in. This wasn't about confrontation anymore. This was about leverage. And leverage is far more dangerous when it is invisible. That evening, I didn't say a word. Instead, I left a small item in the living room, a silver pen Dean liked, a pen he often used to sign checks or jot quick notes. It was innocuous, ordinary, but it carried a message. I know. He noticed it immediately. The way he paused before picking it up, the slight hesitation of his hand, the tremor in his voice when he asked, Olivia, you left this? I smiled faintly. Yes. Nothing more. No explanation. And I watched him retreat to the office, frantic, clicking through files, double-checking accounts, trying to anticipate what I might know. Because I had planted the first seed of fear. And fear is a precursor to mistakes. Claire returned later, sensing the tension in the air before she even crossed the threshold. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse. I simply made dinner and moved about the kitchen as usual, humming softly a melody that was calm on the surface but pointed, controlled, deliberate. Her glances were too frequent, her movements too precise. She was aware of my observation, and that awareness was enough. She began to overcompensate, trying to maintain a normal conversation while her hands fidgeted with her necklace, twisting it round and round. Subtle, tiny, effective. I realized then that Claire was not a threat. Not yet. But she was fragile, brittle. And brittle breaks easily under pressure. The first small domino fell when Dean miscalculated. He left a note on the counter, a rushed, poorly worded apology for something trivial, claiming he had forgotten to attend a meeting that had actually been documented online with Claire. I smiled faintly. I took a picture of the note. Then I left it where Claire could see it. She noticed immediately. Her face paled, a flicker of panic. She moved faster, tried to cover the note, but I saw her reading it, understanding its implication before she even spoke. And that was all it took. The first shift in power had occurred, because now they knew I wasn't oblivious. And once they knew, everything changed. That night, I stood by the window in the dark, watching the faint glow of the city. A single thought settled into my mind like steel. They won't see the next move coming. And it will be devastating. By the 9th day of my silent observation, the atmosphere in the house had shifted. Dean and Claire moved like performers in a play where I wrote the script, but they didn't know it yet. Every glance, every fidget, every hesitation became a mark of guilt. And guilt is a compass that points directly to weakness. I walked through the house, methodical, serene, almost serene in my movements, while mentally noting the patterns they had begun to reveal under pressure. Their overcompensation was predictable now. The tiny cracks in their acts were no longer hidden. Patience had transformed into leverage. And leverage used correctly can topple everything. I started with Dean. Subtle psychological nudges. Things only I would notice, leaving his favorite pen in obvious spots, adjusting a chair slightly off-center, leaving my phone intentionally charging where he could see it, not touching it, knowing he would. The tremor in his hand whenever he interacted with the pen. The slight hesitation when he glanced at the phone. The way his lips pressed together when he caught my eyes during dinner. These were all tiny dominoes I was setting up. Then, the real test, I subtly asked questions in casual tones. Did you get the mail today? Oh, nothing important, he muttered. I wonder. Did anything unusual arrive? His eye twitched. A slight hitch in his breath. He wanted to lie, but the pattern of his guilt was already mapped out. He was slipping, and I let him silently, carefully. Next came Claire. I left subtle hints of observation around her routines. A cup slightly out of place, the light in the hallway left on when she usually turned it off. The front door deliberately unlocked for a few seconds as if I had forgotten to lock it. She moved faster, jittery. She noticed my calm presence everywhere, felt my watchful gaze in the smallest gestures. People crumble under constant, quiet pressure. Claire was brittle. She didn't know how to anticipate me because I didn't act in obvious patterns. And that uncertainty, fear of being caught, makes mistakes inevitable. The tipping point came one evening. I left an unencrypted file on the shared network folder in plain sight, a collection of minor financial irregularities Dean had overlooked. I didn't comment. I didn't warn. I just let it sit, knowing someone curious, greedy, or nervous would open it. Dean did. He scrolled quickly, trying to understand, trying to rationalize. Claire hovered nearby. They whispered, low and sharp. I stayed in the kitchen, casually chopping vegetables. My back to them. They didn't notice me. Not at first. But every whispered calculation, every frantic glance at the file, every muted sigh was audible to me because I was listening, really listening. I didn't interrupt. I didn't judge. I didn't react. I simply observed. And I documented it. Every twitch, every hesitation, every misstep. These were the bricks of my revenge. Every lie they had told. Every betrayal. Every misstep. I was cataloging. I was planning. I was preparing. For days I escalated subtly. I left notes in places that hinted I had been watching. I asked casual questions about events they hadn't disclosed. I referenced things that they assumed I didn't know, watching them flinch. Each small move escalated the psychological tension. They began second-guessing themselves. They began overcompensating. They began leaking information in desperation. I didn't need confrontation. I didn't need tears or arguments. Their guilt became my weapon. One night, I invited Jason over under the guise of a casual meeting about household finances. Dean's face tightened as soon as he saw Jason. Claire's posture stiffened. Jason brought his own observations, small, precise, corroborating what I already knew. They didn't know we were collaborating. They didn't suspect our alliance. But the moment they realized they were being watched from multiple angles, the first moment of panic was the first real crack in their carefully constructed facade. I didn't intervene. I let it happen. Because the real power in revenge lies in letting the guilty reveal themselves, not enforcing it. That night, as I prepared for bed, I left the office lights on enough to cast shadows across the living room. I didn't need to see them. I only needed to know they were aware of me. And I knew. They were terrified. And that fear is only the beginning. The tension in the house had reached a point where it was almost tangible, hanging in the air like a low fog. Dean and Claire moved cautiously now, their gestures rehearsed and measured, as if even a stray breath could expose them. And yet, in that fragile equilibrium, a new variable appeared. Jason called late that evening. His voice was clipped, urgent. "Olivia. I found something. You need to see this." My heart, long hardened against shock, skipped in that precise way it does when control is threatened. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "It's Dean. It's bigger than anything we thought. He's been hiding, he's been embezzling more than just household funds. It's corporate. Offshore accounts. Falsified invoices. He's been laundering money for months. And he's planning to disappear." Disappear. The word lingered, heavy and lethal. This wasn't just betrayal now. This was criminal. My mind, which had already been plotting, shifted into overdrive. Every observation, every breadcrumb, every note of fear I had induced could now be leveraged in ways I hadn't yet imagined. This was bigger than personal revenge. This was exposing the truth before he could vanish. And the revelation made one thing clear. I couldn't wait. Not for the perfect moment. Not for a misstep. I had to act. Strategically. Precisely. Because inaction now meant losing everything. Jason met me that night at a secluded cafe, bringing folders and a USB drive. He slid them across the table. "Everything we've found," he said. "Invoices, transfers, emails, even copies of communications with Claire that implicate her in the schemes. She isn't just a side player, she's complicit." I nodded, scanning quickly. The scale was staggering. The network of deceit far more intricate than I imagined. And yet, my shock was tempered by clarity. I knew exactly what to do next. Returning home, I noticed the subtle changes immediately. Dean had altered his routine, the careful choreography of guilt now overcompensated. He avoided certain rooms, he checked the doors repeatedly, his eyes constantly scanning for, what? For me? For evidence? Claire, on the other hand, had begun to crumble in private, whispering under her breath when she thought no one was listening. And then it happened, a small, unplanned moment of vulnerability. I caught Claire, alone, rifling through a drawer in the kitchen she had no reason to touch. She froze when she saw me, panic in her eyes. "Looking for something?" I asked softly. She stammered. I just wanted to." I smiled faintly. No anger. No accusation. Just quiet observation. The fear in her eyes was confirmation. She knew I was aware. And that awareness, silent but absolute, was my most potent weapon. Then I saw it, the thing I hadn't anticipated. A series of messages on Dean's phone. Left open on the charger. He had been planning to frame me for financial mismanagement. Not only had he betrayed me emotionally, but he had also meticulously constructed a scenario to destroy me legally, financially, and socially. The realization hit with full force. This wasn't just infidelity. This was war. And in that moment, I understood that everything I had been doing, the observation, the subtle manipulations, the psychological nudges, was only the beginning. Now, the stakes had escalated. This was no longer about silent revenge or exposing betrayal. It was about survival, empowerment. and ensuring that when the dust settled, I alone controlled the outcome. I returned home that night with a plan crystallized. Leverage Claire's guilt. She was brittle, easily manipulated. A first move could destabilize both of them. Document Dean's crimes. Every offshore transfer, every falsified invoice, every message confirming his plan to disappear would be secured. Coordinate with Jason. He had access to financial trails that I didn't. Together we could create pressure without raising suspicion. Control the narrative. By the time Dean realized I knew the full extent, it would already be too late for him to redirect blame. It was a dangerous game, but one I was finally ready to play with full awareness. As I prepared for bed, I caught Dean in the hallway. "Olivia, are you okay?" he asked, voice carefully neutral. I tilted my head slightly, letting my calm mask slip just enough to unsettle him. "I'm better than okay," I said quietly. "And I think it's time you start worrying about what comes next. Because now, they didn't just fear discovery, they feared me." The morning light spilled through the blinds, indifferent to the storm brewing inside our house. I moved silently, carefully, every step deliberate, every gesture controlled. Dean and Claire were already awake, but they didn't know it yet. The game had changed. They were no longer the players, they were the pieces. And I was the hand moving them. I had documented, observed, and planned. Now it was time for the first decisive action. I entered the kitchen casually, coffee in hand, voice soft. "Dean, can I see your office for a moment?" He froze. The calm he wore like armor began to crack at the edges. Sure," he said, too quickly. His words betrayed the tension I had been waiting for. Claire lingered near the doorway, pretending to check a recipe, but I saw the flinch when I looked at her. She knew something was coming. I didn't speak further. I let the silence do the work. In Dean's office, I placed the folders and USB drive on his desk. "This," I said softly, "is everything we've found. Every transaction, every email, every lie you've told." His hand hovered over the files as if he could erase them with a flick of his wrist. "Olivia," he began, but I stopped him with a calm gesture. "No. You don't get to explain. Not yet. The power in silence is underestimated. It forces the guilty to confront themselves without distraction." And Dean was starting to crack. Later, in the living room, I left the subtly incriminating note from the previous chapter in plain view again. Claire noticed immediately. Her fingers fidgeted, twisting a bracelet on her wrist nervously. She tried to cover it, but it was too late. The seed of panic had already taken root. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant, the fragile veneer of confidence she had been wearing collapsed. Fear makes even the most cunning people careless. I waited for the tension to peak. Dean paced the hallway, muttering excuses under his breath. Claire was quietly wringing her hands, trying to appear composed. And I remained calm. Still. Collected. Then I made the first verbal move. "I know everything," I said, voice low and controlled. "And I've documented it all. You can continue to lie or you can start being honest. But the choice you make now will determine what happens next." The room went silent. Dean's jaw tightened. Claire's lips trembled. Their fear was palpable. And I realized something crucial. Control had shifted. I didn't need confrontation. I didn't need shouting or tears. I let the weight of knowledge, the inevitability of exposure, and the precision of my documentation work for me. Every twitch, every hesitation, every glance between them was a confirmation. They were afraid. Fear is a powerful ally in revenge. And I had it in abundance. By nightfall, small cracks became apparent. Dean made a series of mistakes while accessing files, his hands shaking. Claire left her phone unattended, an oversight impossible for someone who had been meticulous before. Their communication with each other grew tense, filled with whispered arguments that I could overhear. Every small slip, every misstep, every panicked glance was a domino toppling under the weight of their own guilt. And I watched it happen with quiet satisfaction. The first strike had been executed. The first domino had fallen. And now the path was clear. As I left the office that night, closing the door quietly behind me, I whispered to myself, "They think this is the worst yet. They have no idea what comes next." Because this was only the beginning. And the real devastation had yet to be revealed. The house was heavy with silence, a kind of suffocating anticipation. Dean and Claire moved carefully, each step measured, each word chosen as if even their breaths might betray them. But the trap I had meticulously set was no longer subtle. The first domino had fallen. Now the rest were about to follow. The financial threads, the lies, the deception, they were all intertwined, and all I had to do was pull. Dean didn't realize the significance of the documents I had strategically left lying around. One morning, he discovered I had cross-referenced transactions he thought were hidden. The moment his fingers hovered over the files, I saw the crack in his composure, the first real panic. He made mistakes, small, frantic errors in calculations, duplications, mismanaged transfers. Every misstep fed into the growing tension I observed silently from the kitchen doorway. By the afternoon, I overheard him on the phone, voice low, desperate. "I didn't think she'd find this." "No, no, we can fix it, just wait." The desperation was music to my ears. I didn't intervene. I only observed. Because desperation exposes more than lies ever could. Meanwhile, Claire's facade was unraveling faster than expected. She had begun leaving traces, her fingerprints on the documents she tried to hide, notes carelessly placed on counters, messages left open on devices she believed I didn't see. Her fear had become tangible. I caught her one evening, crouched in the hallway, whispering into her phone, panic in every syllable. I didn't confront her. I only watched, and I knew then that she had begun to realize something crucial. Her role in this was no longer protective, she was expendable. Fear makes accomplices crumble faster than the guilty themselves. By midweek, the first ripple of consequences spread beyond the house. Dean's office called suspicious discrepancies were flagged. Claire's employer had noticed unusual behavior, her absenteeism and unexplained anxiety were visible in her work. Mutual friends began asking awkward questions, sensing tension they couldn't place. Every lie, every hidden act, every betrayal was beginning to expose itself, and all of it traced back to the evidence I had meticulously curated. I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to yell. I didn't even need to confront them directly. I simply let the carefully arranged dominoes fall. One night, I watched them both in the living room. Dean muttered under his breath, glancing at the USB drives I had left in plain sight. Claire paced near the window, wringing her hands. I sat calmly in the kitchen, sipping tea, humming softly, observing every twitch, every glance, every whispered calculation. And then, the first real crack appeared. Dean's voice hitched. He stumbled over his words while explaining something inconsequential, and Claire immediately interjected, not to help, but to protect herself. The alliance they thought secure was cracking, split by panic and mistrust. Every empire built on lies collapses when its foundation is fear. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I heard the faintest sound, a drawer slammed shut in the hallway, followed by hurried footsteps. I knew instantly, the panic had reached a new level. They were beginning to suspect that the hand guiding their collapse was not chance. And soon, they would realize it was me. Because now, there was no going back. No hiding. No second chances. The domino effect was complete, and the real reckoning was about to begin. The air in the house felt thinner now, charged with a tension that no conversation could mask. Dean and Claire moved like cornered animals, eyes darting, hands shaking, whispers exchanged with hurried glances in every direction. I no longer needed subtlety. The first wave of psychological dominoes had fallen. The next step required confrontation. Not loud or dramatic, just precise, controlled, devastatingly calm. I had catalogued every misstep, every hidden transfer, every lie. Now it was time to let them see the consequences of their own choices. I walked into the living room where they were both waiting, pretending normalcy. "Olivia, what do you want?" Dean asked, trying to sound composed. I sat down, crossing my legs, letting the silence stretch. "I want you to understand something," I said softly, deliberately. "Everything I've known, I've documented. Every lie, every betrayal, every misstep you've made while thinking I was oblivious, it's all here." I placed the folders and USB drive on the coffee table, careful to let them see without touching. Dean's hand twitched. Claire's lips parted, a silent gasp trapped behind them. Fear has many faces. I was about to make them all appear. I started calmly, piece by piece, presenting evidence, not words. A folder of transactions Dean claimed were legitimate but were clearly laundered. Claire's messages implicating her in planning and covering for him. Notes, screenshots, emails all interwoven in a tapestry of deceit that they could no longer deny. They tried. They whispered excuses, pointed fingers, tried to justify, rationalize, even beg. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I let the weight of truth speak for itself. Dean's voice began to break. Claire's hands shook. Their composure evaporated in real time. There's a strange kind of satisfaction in watching guilt confront itself. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't allow anger to betray me. I simply walked among them, pointing out inconsistencies, observing reactions, letting every crack grow. You thought I wouldn't notice. I didn't think. Dean stammered. But you did, I said softly. And now it's too late. Claire tried to interject, but even her words faltered under the weight of the evidence. I leaned slightly closer to Dean. Voice a whisper. Do you understand the cost of your choices? He swallowed, eyes wide, realizing fully that the collapse was no longer theoretical. It was happening. And I was orchestrating it. By nightfall, the full weight of the confrontation had hit them. Dean paced in despair, muttering under his breath. Claire crouched near the sofa, staring at the floor, trembling. Their whispered arguments were no longer private, they carried the sound of total defeat. And through it all, I remained calm, serene, calculated. The power shift was complete. They were no longer in control. And I was no longer the woman who had been hurt, betrayed, and silent. I was the architect of their reckoning. As I left the living room that night, closing the door quietly behind me, I whispered to myself. They thought they could outsmart me. They were wrong. And soon, the final pieces will fall. The house had grown unnervingly quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the suffocating kind where every step, every breath, every glance could betray the guilty. Dean and Claire had been unraveling for days, their carefully crafted facades crumbling under the weight of observation, evidence, and silent manipulation. I had let them falter, stumble, and reveal themselves. But this was the moment where everything would become irrevocable. Because what they didn't know was that the final move had already been in place for weeks. Jason had provided the last piece, a subtle financial trail that Dean had overlooked entirely. Olivia, he said quietly when we met that evening, he's missing one link, one small transfer. Expose it, and it's indisputable. I smiled faintly. I had already prepared for this. Everything Dean and Claire had done was documented, corroborated, and now cross-referenced perfectly. The twist wasn't in what they had done. The twist was in who they had trusted, thinking their web was invisible, thinking I was still naive. They had underestimated me. That night, I called a family meeting under the guise of normalcy. Dean and Claire both entered, tense, anticipating confrontation, but unaware of the final evidence sitting before them on the coffee table. I didn't say much. I simply watched them squirm as I methodically presented the new discovery. Dean's jaw tightened. Claire's lips trembled. And then I whispered softly. You thought you had the upper hand. You thought I wouldn't see. You thought I'd remain silent. But I've already won. The room fell silent. Not a single word. Not a single sound except the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then I delivered the final twist. I had already sent copies of the files to the authorities and key stakeholders before they realized the game had shifted. Dean's corporate empire, Claire's influence, even the mutual friends and neighbors, they would all know the truth before the night ended. They weren't just exposed, they were powerless. Dean's hand shook as he reached for the folders. I didn't stop him. I let him understand the magnitude of the consequences in real time. And then I left the room. Quiet, calm, collected. Because power is quiet. Power is invisible. And revenge, true revenge, doesn't need applause. Within hours, Dean was placed under investigation. Claire's complicity was documented and undeniable. Their alliances, once carefully constructed, began to crumble as mutual trust evaporated. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply observed, letting the weight of reality sink in. And that, I realized, was far more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could ever be. Because true victory isn't loud. It's quiet. It's absolute. That night, as I closed the blinds and sat in the dark living room, I whispered to myself. They thought they could escape consequences. They were wrong. And soon, I will decide what comes next. The morning after the storm felt surreal. The house was quiet, not tense. Not fearful but calm in a way that only comes after chaos has been contained. Dean and Claire were gone. Not forcibly, not with confrontation but quietly removed, their presence now unnecessary. Their influence nullified. I walked through the rooms I had once shared with him, touching surfaces, observing traces of betrayal, and feeling something I hadn't allowed myself to experience until now: freedom. The air smelled of possibilities. I began with small actions. Accounts and assets were secured. Files, folders and evidence were archived, safe, organized, and ready if ever needed. Every loose end tied with precision. But beyond logistics, I focused on the psychological shift. No longer was I the betrayed, the silenced, the overlooked. I had become the observer, the strategist, the one holding absolute power over the aftermath. And with that control came clarity. I realized that power isn't given. It's claimed. Quietly, patiently, decisively. I started rebuilding life on my terms. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, people who were real, loyal, grounded. I organized my home, creating spaces that reflected serenity and purpose rather than anxiety and betrayal. I immersed myself in my passions: writing, planning, and even small acts of indulgence I had denied myself. Each action was deliberate. Each choice a reminder that I no longer owed anyone my ignorance or trust. The house that had once contained lies and deceit now became a sanctuary, and every step I took in reclaiming it was quiet empowerment. I thought often of Dean and Claire not with anger anymore, but with understanding. People like that thrive on manipulation and secrecy. They crumble under observation and inevitability. I had watched them unravel. I had orchestrated their exposure. And now, watching my own reflection in the quiet glass of the window, I realized something crucial. I hadn't just defeated them. I had transformed myself. Betrayal had become my teacher. Silence had become my weapon. Observation had become my strategy. And empowerment, my constant companion. That evening, I stood on the balcony, overlooking the city lights. A soft breeze brushed my face, and I whispered quietly, "The game is over. Or perhaps, it's only just begun. But this time, I write the rules." If you've ever been betrayed and silenced, comment below. Would you choose silence and strategy, or confrontation and chaos? Because the path to empowerment is never the one they expect. The house no longer held tension. It breathed with the serenity I had cultivated, a calm that only comes from reclaiming control over chaos. Cole and Claire were gone, their presence a distant memory. Their lies had been exposed, their manipulations neutralized. But the victory was not in their downfall, it was in my own transformation. I sat in the living room, sunlight filtering through the blinds, and let myself truly feel the weight of what had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger, they had been catalysts, not chains. I realized then, the most potent form of revenge is not noise, confrontation, or public spectacle. It is subtle, controlled, and decisive. It is the quiet reclamation of power. I reflected on the months leading up to this moment. The silent observation that revealed truth. The careful documentation that turned uncertainty into leverage. The strategic patience that allowed mistakes to unravel the guilty. Every step had been deliberate. Every pause, calculated. Every decision, measured. I had learned that betrayal is not just an act of others, it is also a mirror, revealing where trust has been misplaced, where control has been ceded. And with understanding comes power. I learned the most important truth: true empowerment does not come from vengeance alone. It comes from clarity, strategy, and patience. The people who tried to deceive me had underestimated my resolve. They assumed emotion would cloud my judgment. They assumed chaos would weaken me. But I chose silence over confrontation, patience over panic, and strategy over recklessness. And in doing so, I reclaimed my life not just from them, but from the uncertainty and pain that once held me captive. Sometimes, the greatest victory is the one that is invisible to those who caused your suffering. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I stepped onto the balcony. The city lights shimmered, distant and indifferent. I felt no need for applause, no need for acknowledgement. The peace of finality was enough. I had survived betrayal. I had orchestrated justice. I had emerged stronger, quieter, and more aware. And I smiled not with bitterness but with calm, unshakable power. The world could keep spinning, the guilty could face consequences. And I was finally free. If you've been captivated by Olivia's journey, comment below. What would your strategy be if betrayal struck quietly around you? And remember, power isn't loud. It's measured, deliberate, and ultimately yours to claim.